Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4 of Origin Story. And I want you to know that as we enter into the talk this week, that I really want to challenge you to just be willing to listen. Be willing to listen and hear the truth of what I think Jesus tells us throughout the Bible and throughout Scripture, because right now we're in a huge season of turmoil. A lot of anger and frustration and hatred, and I believe God always wants to speak truth to us in these moments. And I'm actually amazed by the teach this week, and I want you to know this. So I planned out my series all the way back in February, not knowing that COVID was going to happen, not knowing that all of this would come about, and I'm just amazed at God's timing of this teach, and I feel like God is not just trying to speak to you guys today, but He's trying to speak to me, and He's trying to speak to everyone of just the importance of what it looks like to love our neighbor. So with this final week of Origin Story, we are going to be talking about what it looks like for us to look at the wrongs in the world, but not just stop there, but look at the wrongs within ourselves and seek to find reconciliation and love our neighbor. Because over the last few weeks, we've been talking about what it looks like in our origin stories and looking at stories and understanding the stories of superheroes and how we are also called as Christians to pursue those things well. In week 1, we talked about how we are supposed to embrace who God has created us to be and seek to bring good into the world because of that. And in the second week, we talked about how we are supposed to care for others and step out and value them. And then last week, we talked about how we are supposed to surround ourselves with a good team, surround ourselves with people that challenge us, surround ourselves with people that are different than us and that can help us grow and be better. And then today, we are challenged to, like superheroes in the movies that we watch, seek to bring reconciliation. Seek to see the wrong in the world and ask ourselves, what must I do about it? But then not stop there. Not stop at the questions, but then move into action. Because that is when we see heroes. We see heroes in the people who choose to find the good and choose to pursue the good, even in the hardest situations. And the thing is, we are not just called to seek reconciliation in the world and in the big wrongs that we see, but we are actively called by God to seek reconciliation and to seek to right what has been wrong in us as well. I want to talk through a story in Luke that I think really shows how Jesus challenges us to do this. And it's in Luke 10, 25 through 29. What you need to know about this story is a lawyer decides that he wants to try and confuse Jesus. He wants to try and confuse Jesus and get him to say something that can get him in trouble with the religious leaders of that time. And this is something that they were actively trying to do to Jesus all the time, because then they could kill him. If he said something that upset the religious leaders that could give them the right to crucify him, they would. And so the lawyer asked him this. In Luke 10, 25 through 29, this is what it says. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" The lawyer wanted to challenge Jesus, and he wanted to ask him, who is my neighbor? Who qualifies as my neighbor? Because when I know who qualifies as my neighbor, then I can understand where the line is on who I'm supposed to treat well and who I can ignore. And I think we all do this. I think we all hear love your neighbor as yourself, and we wonder who qualifies. And we kind of wonder, okay, well, I can love this person, but I don't know if I can love this person. And it's super easy for us to try and sift through that statement and wonder, who am I supposed to love and who am I not required to love? But Jesus responds with a story that I think is so important for us to hear and know, and I think it's honestly really relevant to this time. And Jesus responds by telling the story of the Good Samaritan. And if you don't know what this story is, what happens is a Jewish man is beaten and bruised and left for dead on the side of the road. He's on the side of the road and he is bleeding out, and Pharisees walk by. These are religious leaders of the time, and they walk by and they see this man lying on the road, bloodied and dying, and they move to the other side of the road and they walk past him. They do this because they don't want to be tainted by whatever sin has caused him to be there. They don't want to be tainted by the blood that he is spilling. They don't want to lower the standards of where they are at, the respect that they have to help this man that they are religious leaders of. And then next, a Levite walks by. A Levite walks by and he does the same thing for the same reasons. And then finally, a Samaritan walks by. And a Samaritan is somebody who is at odds with the Jewish people. They are enemies. They are enemies, they are at war, they hate each other. In no way do they agree with each other or care for each other. But what this Samaritan man does is he sees this Jewish man on the side of the road, dying and bloodied and bruised. And you know what he does? He picks him up. He picks him up and he takes him into town and he takes him to an inn so that the man can rest and get better, and he pays for his room. He pays for his room and his food and any other expenses that it might cause. And that's because the Samaritan man understands what it means to love your neighbor. Loving your neighbor means that you don't pay attention to if they agree with you religiously, or they agree with you politically, or they completely affirm everything that you care for. No. The Samaritan man saw another human being. Another human being, and understood the value that he had and how he needed to care for him. And that's what it means for us to love our neighbor. To value every human being we come across. To care for them regardless of their beliefs, regardless of their status, regardless of their race, any of that, and recognize that they deserve to be valued and cared for. And as Christians, as what Jesus is telling us to do, we are called to lend out a hand. To lend out a hand to those who are hurting, even if we are at odds with them, and to care, to value. That is what it means to love your neighbor. What Jesus is doing by sharing this story is that he is challenging this lawyer, he's challenging the Pharisees, and he's challenging us to recognize that loving our neighbor is not supposed to be easy, it's not supposed to be convenient, and loving our neighbor does not mean we can pick and choose who we love based on our comfort and based on what we want to protect about ourselves. Loving our neighbor is loving everyone. Loving our neighbor is seeing all the needs that we might find, is coming across people who might be different than us, and trying to understand where they are at, what they might need, and doing what we can to help. Loving our neighbor is stepping out of our comfort and stepping out of ourselves, humbling ourselves, and doing what we can to care. So in this season, in this crazy season, I don't have all the answers. I think Jesus does, and so I think it's important for us to start there, to start with what he tells us to do, which is love. Love our neighbors, but first, I think we need to look at ourselves. We need to look at ourselves and ask ourselves some simple questions that can be hard to answer. And those questions are this: how can I understand better the situations of others around me? How can I listen better to those I might not understand? How can I educate myself on all sides of the arguments? And then finally, how can I love better? How can I love better in all these situations? How can I love better in the arguments that I have? How can I love better in the stances that I take? How can I love better in the things I choose to follow and the people I choose to care for? How can I love better in all situations? And it can start super small. It can start with conversations. It can start with your family. It can start with your friends. But most importantly, it can start with yourself. Jesus calls us to love. And so that is the question we should always be asking ourselves, especially in this season. How can I put aside anger? How can I put aside prejudice? How can I put aside what I may know and trust in what Jesus calls us to know? Which is that we are called to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, with all our strength. What we are being called to do is to love God with everything we have. And then after that, we're called to love everyone else with everything we have. And I think that starts with humility, and I think it starts with patience, with yourself and with others, and it starts with grace and wisdom. So I just pray that in this season we can be a people who don't allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by all the information that we are receiving from all the sides. Yes, we must inform ourselves and we should look at all sides of the story, but instead first go to Jesus. Go to Jesus and center ourselves and center our actions around who He calls us to be. And that is somebody who loves our neighbor. So I just pray that we can be the kind of people that take action in the smallest ways and the biggest. I pray that people can know who we love and know that we are followers of Jesus by the way we care and the way that we go out and represent that in how we share our views, how we share our faith, and how we come alongside those who are hurting and broken and seek to understand and help. And that can happen in so many different ways, but in order for us to figure that out, we first have to ask, how can I love better? So I hope you can hear that today, guys, and not feel condemned, because this is not you being condemned, but instead you being invited to be a part of the solution that Jesus invites us to be a part of. The solution and the only solution that can bring peace into this world, and that is love and the love of Jesus. We're invited to be a part of that. I'm excited to see what we do with it. So, thanks for coming today, guys. I hope you enjoy small group. All right. It's time for announcements. I dropped something. It's time for announcements with Roni and Chip. Oh my goodness. Guys, we have 2 announcements for you this week. Dad, what is the first one?
We are in James again this week.
Yes! What does that mean? James Bible Study. On where?
The internet.
Which is?
WLSimpact.org.
No.
Oh, dang.
It's Instagram.
Oh, yeah, Instagram.
Instagram, and then a discussion group afterwards. 7 p.m. on Wednesdays, we're diving into James, guys. It's gonna be super good. And then the next thing is our senior celebration is next Sunday. What? And what that means is from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m., we have asked our seniors who attended South Lake, at least in the last year, to come and receive a gift from us just to feel seen, loved, and celebrated for graduating. But if you are not a senior and you want to celebrate them as well, you can show up with a sign and you can park your car in the parking lot and hold up the sign. We do need to practice safe social distancing, but if you feel like celebrating, you're more than welcome. Just shoot me an email and let me know that you are coming. And my email is vwood@willowcreek.org. And the last thing, guys, is we are actually not doing a TikTok this week. With everything that's going on in the world and all the seriousness that is happening, it just didn't seem
to fit, did it?
No, and I don't really think mine or my dad's dancing is gonna solve
It'll never solve anything.
anything. So we're gonna end service right here at the end of these announcements. We will see you guys in small group. So thanks for coming. This was Roni and Chip.
Signing off.
Doing announcements. I always do the hand. That's I can't. can stop.